The lightning split the night sky as Lydia Lockhart clutched her sodden shawl tighter around her shoulders, her body trembling with cold and exhaustion. The deluge that had plagued the Colorado Territory for 3 relentless days showed no sign of abating, and with each laborious step through the muddy terrain, her strength waned. Ahead, through the curtain of rain, a faint light flickered, the only beacon of hope in this merciless April storm of 1876. Lydia's vision blurred as she stumbled forward, her boots sinking into the mud. The journey from Denver had depleted her last reserves. Her father's death, the subsequent loss of their home, and the betrayal of the man she'd foolishly believed loved her, had forced her west with nothing but a letter from an old family friend promising work in Salina. But the stagecoach had been forced to stop miles back due to washed-out roads, and the driver's directions to the nearest homestead had become muddled in her exhausted mind. The light grew closer, a lantern hanging from the porch of a modest cabin. With her last ounce of strength, Lydia dragged herself forward, up 3 wooden steps, before her legs finally surrendered. As consciousness slipped away, she heard the creak of a door opening and felt strong arms catching her before she hit the rough-hewn boards. "Good Lord," a deep voice murmured above her. "Where did you come from, miss?" When Lydia opened her eyes again, warmth surrounded her. She lay on a bed beneath several wool blankets, her damp clothes replaced by a man's oversized shirt and a pair of drawers cinched tight at the waist. A fire crackled in a stone hearth nearby, casting dancing shadows across unfamiliar walls. Panic surged through her as she tried to sit up. "Easy now," came that same deep voice. A tall figure moved from the shadows into the firelight. "You're safe." Her rescuer stood over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean frame. His face, partially obscured by several days' worth of stubble, was handsome in a rugged way, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a clear blue that reminded her of summer skies, a stark contrast to his sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Who are you?" Lydia's voice emerged as a rasp. "And my clothes, Samuel Everett," he replied, offering a tin cup of water. "Most folks call me Sam, and don't worry about your clothes. Mrs. Wilkins from the neighboring homestead helped you out of those wet things. She's gone home now that the rains let up some." Lydia accepted the water gratefully, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. "Lydia Lockhart," she managed. "I was headed to Salina." "You found it, Miss Lockhart," Sam said with a slight smile. "Well, the outskirts anyway. Town proper is another 3 miles east." He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. "Mind telling me what you're doing traveling alone in weather fit for neither man nor beast?" Lydia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger. Yet there was something in his direct gaze that inspired trust. "I received a letter from Mrs. Eleanor Bennett. She was a friend of my father's, offering work as her companion after I wrote of my circumstances." She swallowed hard. "My father passed 6 weeks ago. The bank took our home in Denver shortly after." Sam nodded, his expression softening. "I know Eleanor, good woman. Her husband was the town doctor before he passed last winter." "Then you can direct me to her home when the weather clears?" Lydia asked, relief washing over her. A shadow crossed Sam's face. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Miss Lockhart." He sighed heavily. "Eleanor took ill with pneumonia 10 days ago. She didn't survive." The news hit Lydia like a physical blow. Her last hope gone, she turned her face away, unwilling to let this stranger witness her despair. "I'm truly sorry," Sam said quietly. "I understand what it means to have your plans upended." Lydia fought to compose herself. "I suppose I'll need to find passage back to Denver then. In this weather, The stage won't run for days, maybe weeks with the way the creek's flooded. Sam stood and moved to stoke the fire. Besides, what's waiting for you there? Nothing, she admitted after a long silence. No one. Sam turned back to her, firelight illuminating his face. Then I reckon you found shelter for as long as you need it, maybe forever if that suits you. Lydia stared at him, unsure if she'd heard correctly. Mr. Everett, I cannot impose, it's no imposition. I've got the space and winter's behind us. The ranch keeps me busy, but I could use an extra pair of hands. He gestured around the cabin. It's not much, but it's dry and warm. You're offering employment, Lydia clarified, her brow furrowed. For now, Sam replied cryptically. Rest tonight. We'll talk more in the morning. As Sam moved to the other side of the cabin, where a second bed was partially concealed by a hanging blanket, Lydia sank back against the pillow. Outside, thunder rumbled, but for the first time in weeks, she felt something besides fear and grief, the faint stirrings of hope. Morning brought watery sunshine, and the realization that Sam Everett's ranch was considerably more than the modest homestead she'd initially imagined. From the cabin's porch, Lydia surveyed the property: a barn, corrals holding several horses, a chicken coop, and in the distance, what appeared to be grazing cattle on rolling grassland that extended to the foothills of mountains still capped with snow. Not what you expected. Sam's voice came from behind her. Lydia turned to find him carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She accepted one gratefully, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. Her borrowed clothes, a simple calico dress that Mrs. Wilkins had apparently brought over, was a bit large but clean and serviceable. I thought you were a homesteader, she admitted. This seems quite extensive for one man. Sam leaned against the porch railing. Started small 5 years ago. Worked as a ranch hand for the Clarksons north of here. Saved every penny. When old man Simmons wanted to retire, I bought his place. Been adding to it since. A touch of pride colored his voice. Now run about 300 head of cattle with help from 2 hands who bunk in the back of the barn. It's impressive, Lydia said sincerely. It's a living. Sam sipped his coffee. What about you? What skills do you bring besides looking half drowned on a man's doorstep? Despite herself, Lydia smiled at his teasing tone. I can cook clean, so. My father was a teacher, so I'm well educated. I speak passable French and can play the piano, though I don't imagine that's particularly useful here. No piano, Sam agreed with a slight smile. But the cooking would be welcome. Been surviving on my own attempts and whatever Mrs. Wilkins brings over when she takes pity on me. Lydia hesitated. Mr. Everett, I appreciate your offer, but I should be clear. I have no intention of. That is, I'm not seeking an arrangement of a personal nature. Sam's eyebrows shot up, and then, to her surprise, he laughed, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his serious face. Miss Lockhart, I'm offering employment as a housekeeper, not proposing marriage or anything less respectable. His eyes twinkled. Though I can see how shelter forever might have sounded, poor choice of words on my part. Heat rushed to Lydia's cheeks. I apologize for misunderstanding. No need, Sam assured her. It's a reasonable concern for a woman alone, but I promise you'll be treated with nothing but respect here. He straightened. I can offer room, board, and $30 a month. Fair. $30 was generous, more than she'd expected for housekeeping duties. Lydia nodded slowly. Very fair, thank you. Good. Sam drained his coffee cup. There's a small room off the kitchen I use for storage. We can clear it out to give you some privacy. In the meantime, I need to check the south pasture. The creek runs through there, and I'm worried about the cattle after all this rain. As Sam walked toward the barn, Lydia took in a deep breath of the clear morning air, tinged with the scent of wet earth and pine. For the first time in months, She felt the weight on her shoulders lighten slightly. Whatever the future held, she had at least found temporary refuge. The first week on the Everett ranch passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Sam and his ranch hands, brothers named Tom and Jesse Walker, had cleared out the small room off the kitchen, bringing in a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and even hanging a small mirror on the wall. It was modest, but private, a sanctuary Lydia hadn't expected to find again after her father's death. She threw herself into her new duties with determination, grateful for the routine. The cabin, while not dirty, showed the neglect of a man who spent most of his time outdoors. Lydia scrubbed floors, washed windows, and organized the chaotic pantry. She took over the cooking, preparing hearty meals that brought appreciative noises from Sam and occasional visits from the Walker brothers when invited. Sam himself remained something of an enigma. He rose before dawn and often returned after dark, working tirelessly. When their paths crossed, he was unfailingly polite, occasionally sharing news of the ranch or asking about her comfort, but never pressing for details about her past beyond what she'd already shared. There was a quiet dignity in his reserve that Lydia found herself respecting. On the 8th day, a buckboard wagon appeared in the yard, driven by a stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Mrs. Wilkins had come to check on the poor, bedraggled creature she'd helped that stormy night. She brought with her a basket of freshly baked bread and, more importantly, fabric and patterns to help Lydia expand her meager wardrobe. "Can't be wearing the same dress every day, Mrs. Wilkins declared as she spread the fabrics on the kitchen table. "And Samuel's too proud to mention it, but I know he hasn't thought about such practicalities." "This is incredibly kind," Lydia said, running her fingers over a pretty blue cotton. "I'll pay you back once I receive my first wages." Mrs. Wilkins waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. Consider it a welcome gift." She fixed Lydia with a shrewd gaze. "Now, how are you truly settling in? Samuel can be rather taciturn, I know. Mr. Everett has been nothing but generous," Lydia replied carefully. "Mr. Everett, is it, Mrs.?" Wilkins smiled. "So formal. Well, I suppose that's proper, given the circumstances." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "He's a good man, you know, keeps to himself mostly since he came here, but always first to help when needed. Half the unmarried women in Salina have set their caps for him, but he doesn't seem to notice." Lydia busied herself with folding the fabric, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I'm simply grateful for the employment." "Of course, dear, Mrs." Wilkins' tone suggested she didn't entirely believe this was the whole truth. "Well, I should be going. My Arthur will be wanting his dinner, but you come visit us soon. Our place is just over the north ridge. You can see our chimney smoke on clear days." After Mrs. Wilkins departed, Lydia sat at the table with her newly acquired sewing supplies, contemplating the older woman's words. She wasn't blind to Sam Everett's appeal, his quiet strength, his evident integrity, the occasional glimpse of humor that softened his serious demeanor. But Lydia had learned her lesson about trusting too quickly after Richard Calloway had pursued her so ardently in Denver, only to disappear the moment her father's death revealed there would be no inheritance. No, she decided as she cut into the fabric, practical considerations must take precedence over any foolish romantic notions. Security, independence, rebuilding her life, these were her priorities now. When Sam returned that evening, covered in mud from helping extract a cow from a boggy streambed, he paused at the sight of Lydia at the table, needle flashing in the lamplight as she worked on a new skirt. "Mrs. Wilkins came by," Lydia explained, not looking up from her stitching. "Ah," Sam said, removing his mud-caked boots at the door. That explains the smell of fresh bread. She means well. She was very kind, Lydia agreed. She also mentioned I should visit their homestead sometime. Sam moved to wash his hands and face at the basin. The Wilkins are good neighbors. Arthur has a bad back from an old mining accident, so I try to help them out when I can. He dried his face on a towel. I could take you over there Sunday after church if you'd like. Lydia looked up, surprised. Church? In town, Sam clarified. I try to go most Sundays, weather permitting. You're welcome to join me. The prospect of attending church again brought an unexpected lump to Lydia's throat. Sunday services had been a cornerstone of life with her father, a ritual lost along with so much else. I'd like that, she said softly. Very much. Sam nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Good, we'll leave after breakfast then. He glanced at the stew simmering on the stove. Smells delicious. As they ate dinner that evening, Sam seemed more talkative than usual, describing the condition of the pastures after the floods and his plans for the spring cattle drive to Denver in a month's time. I'll be gone for about 2 weeks, he explained. Tom and Jesse will stay behind to look after things here. Lydia felt an unexpected pang at the thought of his extended absence. I understand. I'll make sure everything runs smoothly while you're away. Sam studied her for a moment. I have no doubts about that, Miss Lockhart. Lydia, she said impulsively. After all, if I'm to be here for some time, perhaps we could dispense with such formality. His blue eyes warmed. Lydia, then, and I'm Sam, not Mr. Everett. Sam, she repeated, feeling oddly shy. Will you tell me more about the cattle drive? I've never known anyone who's undertaken such a journey. And so, as the evening deepened around them, Sam spoke of previous drives, the challenges, the camaraderie among the men, the satisfaction of delivering healthy cattle to market. Lydia listened, captivated by this glimpse into a world so different from her sheltered upbringing in Denver's respectable society. Later, as she lay in her narrow bed, Lydia acknowledged to herself that the fluttering in her chest whenever Sam's gaze met hers was becoming harder to ignore. But she would be cautious this time. Her heart couldn't withstand another betrayal. Sunday dawned clear and mild. Lydia rose early to prepare a special breakfast and to press her best dress, now freshly laundered after its journey through the storm. It was a simple navy blue wool, high-necked and long-sleeved, but well-made and still presentable despite its travels. When she emerged from her room, she found Sam waiting in the main room, almost unrecognizable in a clean white shirt, dark waistcoat, and string tie. His usually unruly hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his stubble to a more civilized length. He stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Is something wrong? Lydia asked, suddenly self-conscious. Sam cleared his throat. Not at all, you look very nice. A warm flush crept up Lydia's neck. Thank you, as do you. The journey into Salina took less than an hour by wagon. As they approached, Lydia observed a typical frontier town taking shape, a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, including a general store, saloon, small hotel, and various businesses. The church stood at the far end, a white clapboard building with a modest steeple. It's growing, Sam commented as they drove down the rutted main street. When I first arrived, there wasn't much more than the trading post and saloon. The railroad coming through last year made all the difference. Several people called out greetings to Sam as he helped Lydia down from the wagon. She felt curious eyes appraising her, whispers following as Sam guided her toward the church with a light hand at her elbow. Inside, the simple building was already filling with families and couples. Sam led Lydia to a pew about halfway down the aisle, nodding politely to acquaintances. Before the service could begin, A distinguished-looking gentleman with silver hair approached. "Sam Everett, you've been holding out on us," the man said with a smile, his eyes twinkling as they rested on Lydia. "Mayor Collins," Sam acknowledged, standing. "May I present Miss Lydia Lockhart? She's recently arrived from Denver and is working as my housekeeper. Lydia, this is Mayor Howard Collins." "A pleasure, Miss Lockhart," the mayor said, bowing slightly. "Denver's loss is certainly Selena's gain." "Thank you, sir," Lydia replied politely. "Everyone has been most welcoming." "Well, you must come to our social next Saturday," the mayor continued. "The whole town gathers at the hotel for music and refreshments once a month. Nothing fancy but good company." Before Lydia could respond, a woman in an elaborately trimmed bonnet appeared at the mayor's side. "Howard, aren't you going to introduce me?" Her smile didn't quite reach her assessing eyes. "Of course, my dear. This is Miss Lockhart from Denver. Miss Lockhart, my wife, Victoria Collins." "Charmed," Mrs. Collins said, her gaze flicking between Lydia and Sam. "How interesting that you've come all this way to work as a housekeeper." The slight emphasis on the last word made its implication clear. Lydia felt her cheeks warm, but before she could respond, Sam spoke up. "Miss Lockhart is an educated woman who's faced recent hardships with remarkable dignity," he said, his voice carrying a subtle edge. "We're fortunate she's chosen to stay in Selena." Mrs. Collins had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Of course. The social is at 7 on Saturday, Miss Lockhart. Do join us." She tugged at her husband's arm, leading him away. "I apologize," Sam murmured as they sat down. "Victoria Collins considers herself the arbiter of Selena society." "It's all right," Lydia assured him, though her stomach knotted at the realization of how her presence might be misinterpreted. "I've encountered her type before." The service began, preventing further conversation. Lydia tried to focus on the minister's words, but her mind kept returning to the Collins exchange and the complications her position might create. She'd been naive not to consider how living unchaperoned in a bachelor's home would appear, regardless of the separate sleeping quarters and strictly professional relationship. After church, several more introductions followed: the shopkeeper and his wife, the blacksmith, a few ranching families. Most were genuinely welcoming, though Lydia detected curiosity and the occasional raised eyebrow behind polite smiles. As promised, Sam drove to the Wilkins homestead afterward. The couple welcomed them warmly, with Mrs. Wilkins proudly showing Lydia her vegetable garden while the men discussed a broken plow Arthur was repairing for Sam. "Don't let Victoria Collins trouble you," Mrs. Wilkins said quietly as they inspected young lettuce plants. "She treats everyone from outside her circle that way." "I'm more concerned about how my situation reflects on Sam," Lydia admitted. "I hadn't considered the impropriety." "Nonsense," Mrs. Wilkins interrupted firmly. "Anyone who knows Samuel understands he's a man of honor. Besides, you're hardly the first widow to take a position as housekeeper." Lydia started. "But I'm not, perhaps not officially," Mrs. Wilkins said with a wink. "But a young woman alone who's suffered loss and seeks employment is generally assumed to be widowed. Much simpler that way, don't you think?" Understanding dawned on Lydia. Mrs. Wilkins was offering a socially acceptable explanation for her presence at Sam's ranch. A widow wouldn't raise nearly as many eyebrows as an unmarried young woman. Yes, I suppose it is simpler," Lydia agreed cautiously. Mrs. Wilkins patted her arm. "Then it's settled. Now, let me show you my prize rhubarb. It's coming in beautifully this year." On the drive back to the ranch, Lydia was unusually quiet, mulling over the day's events. Finally, as they crested the ridge that would bring the ranch into view, she spoke. "Sam, I'm concerned that my presence in your home might damage your reputation." He glanced at her, then back at the road. "Is that what's been weighing on you since church?" Mrs. Collins made it clear what some might assume, and others were surely thinking the same. Lydia twisted her hands in her lap. "Perhaps I should seek lodging in town, and work where?" Sam asked practically. "The only positions for women in Salina are at the hotel or the saloon, neither of which I'd recommend." "But your standing in the community is secure enough," Sam interrupted firmly. "I don't give a damn what Victoria Collins thinks, and neither should you." His uncharacteristic bluntness surprised Lydia into silence. Sam sighed, his expression softening. "Look, Mrs. Wilkins mentioned her. Suggestion. If you're more comfortable allowing people to think you're a widow, I've no objection, but I won't have you displaced over idle gossip." The fierce protectiveness in his voice stirred something deep within Lydia. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." His eyes met hers briefly, intense and searching, before returning to the trail ahead. "You're welcome, Lydia." As April gave way to May, life on the Everett ranch fell into a rhythm that became increasingly comfortable. Lydia's days were filled with household duties, tending to the kitchen garden Mrs. Wilkins had helped her establish, and occasionally riding into town for supplies. At Sam's insistence, she'd learned to handle the gentlest of his horses, a dappled mare named Daisy, giving her a newfound independence. Sam's preparations for the cattle drive intensified. Additional hands were hired temporarily, provisions stockpiled, and the selected cattle separated from the main herd. Through it all, Sam included Lydia in the planning, explaining decisions and occasionally asking her opinion, particularly regarding supplies and provisions. Their evenings had evolved as well. Where once they'd eaten in relative silence or exchanged only necessary conversation, now they lingered at the table, sharing stories and observations. Lydia gradually revealed more about her life in Denver, her father's position as a respected teacher, their modest but comfortable home, her mother's death from influenza when Lydia was just 12. She spoke less about Richard Calloway's courtship and betrayal, though she'd acknowledged the broken engagement. In turn, Sam shared his own journey growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing both parents to a fever when he was 17, his decision to head west rather than work his father's struggling land. He'd been a cowhand, a freight driver, even briefly a deputy sheriff before saving enough to purchase his first parcel of land outside Salina. "Why here?" Lydia asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Of all places, why Salina? Sam was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was contemplative. "I came through during the War 63, I think. Just a tiny settlement then, but the valley struck me. The mountains rising up behind, the open grassland, the creek running clear." He gestured toward the vista before them. "I remember thinking, if I survive this mess, I'll come back here. It was the first place that felt like it could be home." "You fought in the war?" Lydia asked, surprised he'd never mentioned it. "Union cavalry," Sam confirmed with a nod. "Enlisted at 18, saw more than I care to remember." His expression grew distant. "When it ended, I drifted west again. Took me 10 years to get back here, but I never forgot that promise to myself." Something in his tone made Lydia wonder if there was more to the story, perhaps someone left behind, a heartbreak of his own. But she didn't press, respecting the boundaries of their evolving friendship. The town social at the hotel proved more enjoyable than Lydia had anticipated. With Mrs. Wilkins' widow suggestion tacitly accepted, she found herself welcomed by most of the community. She danced with several partners, including Mayor Collins and the schoolteacher, but it was the two dances with Sam that left her breathless and confused. His hand at her waist, his blue eyes holding hers as they moved through the figures of a waltz. Lydia found herself responding to his nearness in ways that alarmed her. This wasn't part of her careful plan to rebuild her life independently. Yet when Sam smiled down at her, his usually serious face transformed, she couldn't help but smile back, drawn to him despite her reservations. The night before the cattle drive was set to depart, Sam returned to the cabin later than usual. Lydia had kept his dinner warm and was sitting at the table mending one of his shirts when he entered, his expression weary but determined. "Everything's ready," he announced, washing up before sitting down to the meal she served. "We leave at first light." 20 men, 500 head of cattle, and a 2-week journey if the weather holds. Lydia nodded, trying to ignore the heaviness in her chest at the thought of his absence. "I've packed the provisions you requested. The coffee is ready to load in the morning. Thank you." Sam ate steadily for a few minutes, then set down his fork. "Lydia, there's something I need to discuss with you." His serious tone made her look up sharply. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing like that." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew an envelope. "This contains $60 your salary for this month and next, in advance. I've also written a letter authorizing you to draw funds from my account at the bank in Salina if needed." Lydia stared at the envelope he placed on the table between them. "That's very generous, but there's more," Sam continued. "I've spoken with Tom and Jesse. They'll sleep in the barn as usual but check on you daily. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask them." "I'll be fine," Lydia assured him, touched by his thoroughness. "I'm quite capable of looking after myself for 2 weeks." "I know you are," Sam said with a slight smile, "but the spring storms can be unpredictable, and I'd rest easier knowing you have support if needed." He hesitated, then added, "I've also asked Mrs. Wilkins to visit regularly." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "To chaperone me in your absence? I'm hardly likely to entertain gentlemen callers, Sam." A hint of color touched his cheekbones. "For company," he clarified, "and perhaps as a precaution against wagging tongues." "Ah," Lydia nodded, understanding. Even with the widow pretense, a young woman alone might invite speculation. "That's thoughtful." Sam seemed to struggle with something else he wanted to say, but finally just nodded and returned to his meal. Later, as she prepared to retire to her room, he called her name softly. "Lydia." She turned at her door to find him watching her, an intensity in his gaze that made her breath catch. "Be careful while I'm gone," he said simply. "I will," she promised. "And you as well. Come back safely, Sam." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite identify, before he nodded and turned away. Lydia closed her door, leaning against it as she acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Samuel Everett. The first week of Sam's absence passed uneventfully. Lydia kept herself busy with deep cleaning projects, sewing, and tending to her expanding garden. Tom and Jesse checked in faithfully each morning, bringing fresh milk from the cow and taking care of the heavier ranch chores. Mrs. Wilkins visited twice, bringing gossip from town and staying for tea. It was during the second week that trouble arrived. Lydia was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when the sound of approaching horses made her look up. 3 riders appeared from the direction of town, moving at a leisurely pace that nonetheless set her nerves on edge. She recognized the lead rider as a man she'd seen in Salina. Decker, she thought his name was. He had a reputation as a troublemaker who frequented the saloon. The other 2 were strangers, rough-looking men with unkempt beards and hard eyes. Lydia quickly gathered her laundry basket and headed for the cabin, but they had already spotted her. "Well, look who we found, boys," Decker called, steering his horse toward her. The Everett widow all alone. Lydia straightened her spine and faced them, keeping her expression neutral despite her racing heart. Mr. Decker, Mr. Everett's hands are just in the barn. I'll let them know you're here. It was a bluff. Tom and Jesse had ridden out to check the north pasture that morning and wouldn't be back until late afternoon, but Decker's smirk told her he knew that. No need, he said, dismounting and approaching her. The other men remained on horseback, watching with obvious amusement. We heard Everett's on a cattle drive. Thought you might appreciate some company. That's very thoughtful, Lydia replied evenly, taking a step backward. But I'm quite busy today. Perhaps another time. Decker moved closer, his gaze traveling insultingly over her figure. Pretty thing like you shouldn't be all alone out here. Lots of dangerous elements about. I'm perfectly safe, thank you. Lydia's hand tightened on the basket handle. Now, if you'll excuse me. She tried to step around him, but he moved to block her path. Not so fast. We've come all this way. Least you could do is offer some hospitality. His tone made it clear what kind of hospitality he had in mind. Fear threatened to paralyze Lydia, but anger surged stronger. She thought of the small revolver Sam kept in the kitchen drawer. He'd shown her how to use it before he left, just in case. If she could reach it. The lady asked you to leave. The new voice, cold, authoritative, came from behind Decker. Lydia looked past him to see a man on horseback at the edge of the yard, rifle held casually but unmistakably at the ready. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face that suggested years of outdoor life. "This ain't your business, old man," Decker snarled, turning to face the newcomer. "I'm making it my business." The stranger dismounted smoothly, keeping the rifle trained on Decker. "Name's Lawrence Steele, U.S. Marshal, and you boys are trespassing on private property, harassing a lady. I suggest you leave. Now." The mention of his title changed the dynamic instantly. Decker's companions shifted nervously in their saddles. "We were just being friendly," Decker muttered, but the bluster had gone out of him. "No harm done." "Then you won't mind taking your friendliness elsewhere," Marshal Steele replied evenly. "I won't ask again." After a tense moment, Decker backed away, mounting his horse with a scowl. "Come on, boys. Place probably ain't worth our time anyway." Lydia watched them ride off, only releasing her breath when they disappeared from view. She turned to her unexpected savior, who was now lowering his rifle. "Thank you, Marshal. Your timing couldn't have been better." The older man nodded, his keen eyes assessing her. "Mrs. Everett, I presume? I was on my way to speak with your husband about some cattle rustling in the territory." "I'm Miss Lockhart, actually," Lydia corrected, deciding honesty was best with a lawman. "I work as Mr. Everett's housekeeper." "He's away on a cattle drive to Denver." If the marshal was surprised, he didn't show it. "I see. Well, Miss Lockhart, those men might return once they've had some liquid courage. Is there somewhere you could stay until Everett returns?" "The Wilkins farm is nearby," Lydia said, considering. "But I hate to abandon my responsibilities here." Marshal Steele nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. I'm heading back to Salina now, but I'll make sure the local sheriff keeps an eye out for those troublemakers, and I'll stop by tomorrow on my way north if that's agreeable." Relief washed over Lydia. "That would be most appreciated, Marshal." After the lawman departed, Lydia hurried inside and retrieved the revolver, keeping it in her apron pocket for the rest of the day. When Tom and Jesse returned, she informed them of the incident. Their reactions were immediate and protective. "I'll stay in the cabin tonight," Jesse offered, his young face serious. "Sleep right by the door. And I'll have a word with Decker when next I see him," Tom added grimly. Lydia was reluctant to disrupt their routine, but recognized the wisdom of the arrangement. Just until Sam returns, she agreed. Marshal Steele was true to his word, arriving the next afternoon to check on her. He accepted her offer of coffee and sat at the kitchen table while she prepared it. "Been a marshal long?" Lydia asked, seeking to fill the silence. "Going on 15 years, he replied. "Before that, Army. Before that, not much worth mentioning." His weathered face creased in a brief smile. "You're not from these parts originally, I gather." "Denver," Lydia confirmed, placing a steaming cup before him. "I came to Salina for employment after my father passed." The marshal nodded, studying her with discerning eyes that seemed to see more than she might wish. "Everett's a good man. One of the few I'd trust without reservation in these parts." "Yes, he is," Lydia agreed softly. "Known him long, a few months only." Marshal Steele sipped his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "Interesting. He's not typically one to open his home to strangers, even those in need." He set down his cup. "Forgive my directness, Miss Lockhart, but I've spent a lifetime reading people. There seems to be more between you and Everett than employer and employee." Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I assure you, Marshal, our arrangement is entirely proper." "No doubt," he agreed easily. "But arrangements have a way of changing when hearts get involved." Before Lydia could formulate a response to this astute observation, hoofbeats sounded outside. She moved to the window, her heart leaping at the sight of a familiar figure dismounting from a trail-worn horse. "Sam!" she exclaimed, forgetting propriety as she hurried outside. He looked exhausted, dust covering his clothes and a week's worth of beard shadowing his jaw, but his eyes lit up at the sight of her. For a moment, Lydia thought he might embrace her, but he caught himself, settling for a warm smile that reached his eyes. "You're back early," she said, suddenly aware of her racing pulse. "Got a good price sooner than expected," Sam explained, his gaze taking in every detail of her face as if reassuring himself she was well. His expression changed as he noticed Marshal Steele emerging from the cabin. "Lawrence. Didn't expect to find you here." "Everett," the marshal acknowledged with a nod. "Came looking for you, found your housekeeper instead. Good timing, too, she had some unwelcome visitors yesterday." Sam's expression darkened instantly. "What happened?" As Lydia recounted the incident with Decker and his companions, Sam's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. When she finished, he turned to the marshal. "I owe you for being here, Lawrence." "Just doing my job," Marshal Steele replied with a shrug. "Though I suspect Decker and his ilk will be giving this place a wide berth once word gets around your back." He picked up his hat from the porch railing. "I'll leave you to get settled. Just wanted to alert you to some cattle rustling reported north of here. Keep an eye out." After the marshal rode away, Sam turned to Lydia, his expression grave. "I shouldn't have left you alone." "You couldn't have known," Lydia assured him. "And I wasn't truly alone. Tom and Jessie have been very attentive and Mrs. Wilkins visited regularly." Sam nodded, though concern still lined his face. "All the same, I'm glad to be back." His gaze softened as it held hers. "I miss this place and you." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through Lydia's chest. "I missed you too," she admitted quietly. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of feelings that had been growing beneath the surface of their carefully maintained propriety. Later, after Sam had cleaned up and eaten the meal Lydia hastily prepared, they sat on the porch as twilight settled over the land. The evening air was mild, scented with pine and the first wildflowers of late spring. "The drive went well?" Lydia asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "Better than expected," Sam confirmed. "Prices were high, weather cooperated. I've been thinking about expanding maybe by the Henderson place that adjoins my north boundary. It's good grazing land." "That sounds promising," Lydia said, genuinely pleased for him. Your hard work is paying off." Sam turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Lydia, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart skipped a beat at his tone. "Yes, during the drive I had a lot of time to think. About the ranch, about the future." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "About us." Lydia's breath caught. "Us? These past months having you here." Sam ran a hand through his hair, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I know this isn't what you planned when you came to Salina. You were looking for a position with Alina Bennett, not ending up as housekeeper to a bachelor rancher." "Sam," Lydia began, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. I need to say this." He took a deep breath. "I care for you, Lydia, more than is appropriate for an employer. I find myself thinking about you when we're apart, looking forward to our conversations each evening. I admire your strength, your intelligence, your dignity in the face of hardship." Lydia sat very still, hardly daring to breathe as he continued. "I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures, but I can offer you a home not as my housekeeper but as my wife, if you'll have me." The directness of his proposal, so like the man himself, brought tears to Lydia's eyes. For a moment, she couldn't speak past the emotion tightening her throat. Sam misinterpreted her silence. "I understand if you need time to consider, or if your answer is no. Nothing would change regarding your position here until you find something more suitable." "Sam," Lydia interrupted softly, finding her voice at last. She reached out to place her hand over his where it rested on the porch railing. "My answer is yes." He stared at her, as if not quite believing what he'd heard. "Yes," Lydia smiled through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his face in that moment was something Lydia knew she would remember for the rest of her life. Sam lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles with a reverence that made her heart swell. "I promise to be a good husband to you, Lydia," he said solemnly. "To protect and provide for you, to treat you as an equal partner in all things. And I promise to stand by your side through whatever life brings," Lydia replied, her voice steady despite the emotions coursing through her. "To make a true home with you, Samuel Everett." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above them, Sam leaned forward and kissed her a tender, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as Lydia responded. When they finally parted, both breathless, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "When I found you on my doorstep that night," he murmured, "I never imagined you'd change my life so completely." Lydia smiled, remembering his words from that stormy evening. "You said I'd found shelter forever." "So I did," Sam acknowledged with a soft laugh. "It seems I knew even then what my heart was trying to tell me." Their wedding took place 3 weeks later in the Salina church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Wilkins had helped Lydia sew a simple but elegant wedding dress of ivory silk, ordered specially from Denver. Mayor Collins performed the ceremony, his wife noticeably warmer toward the bride now that she was marrying one of the area's most prosperous ranchers. Tom and Jesse Walker stood up with Sam, while Mrs. Wilkins served as Lydia's matron of honor. Marshall Steele made a surprise appearance, presenting the couple with a fine silver picture frame as a wedding gift before continuing on his circuit. The celebration afterward at the hotel was joyous and extended well into the evening. When Sam finally drove his bride home under a canopy of stars, Lydia felt a curious mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The cabin had been transformed in her absence that day. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. The bed, now moved from Sam's former sleeping area to the main room, was made up with new linens, and a bottle of champagne sat cooling in a bucket of water. "Mrs. Wilkins is doing," Sam explained, noting Lydia's surprise. "She came by while we were at the church." "Remind me to thank her," Lydia said softly, Touched by the thoughtful gesture, Sam moved to stand behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Are you happy, Mrs. Everett?" The new name sent a thrill through Lydia. She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "Happier than I ever thought possible." His kiss was tender at first, then increasingly passionate as they gave themselves permission to express the desire they'd carefully restrained for so long. Later, lying in his arms as moonlight spilled through the window, Lydia marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment, from desperation on a stormy night to profound joy in the arms of a man whose quiet strength and integrity had restored her faith in love. "What are you thinking?" Sam murmured against her hair. "That sometimes life's greatest storms lead us exactly where we need to be," Lydia replied, nestling closer against his chest. "In that case," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "I'm grateful for the rain." The years that followed brought changes to the Everett ranch and family. With the profits from subsequent cattle drives, Sam purchased the Henderson property, expanding their holdings substantially. A proper house replaced the cabin, a two-story home with a wide porch wrapping around three sides, large windows to capture the mountain views, and enough bedrooms for the family they both hoped to have. Lydia proved to be not just a loving wife, but a capable partner in the ranch operations. Her education and quick mind made her an asset in keeping the books and corresponding with buyers. She also began teaching the children of neighboring ranches 3 days a week in a small schoolhouse Sam built on their property, fulfilling a need in the growing community and honoring her father's legacy. Their first child, a son they named William Arthur after both their fathers, arrived 14 months after their wedding. The birth was difficult, with the doctor from Salina arriving barely in time after a frantic Sam rode through the night to fetch him. For hours, Sam paced outside their bedroom door, terrified of losing the woman who had become his whole world. When the doctor finally emerged to announce mother and son were both healthy, Sam fell to his knees in gratitude before rushing to Lydia's side. The sight of his wife, exhausted but radiant, cradling their newborn son, was one Sam would describe years later as the most beautiful moment of his life. As he gently took his son into his arms for the first time, the tiny fingers curling instinctively around his rough, calloused thumb, Sam made a silent vow to be the kind of father his own had been: patient, just, and loving. 2 years later, twins Emma and Elizabeth joined the family, filling the house with twice the laughter and mischief. Sam doted on his daughters, who quickly learned to wrap their father around their little fingers with wide smiles and innocent requests for just one more bedtime story. Through it all, the joys and challenges of ranch life, parenthood, and marriage, Lydia and Sam remained deeply committed to each other. Their partnership grew stronger with each passing season, built on mutual respect, shared values, and an abiding love that had begun on a stormy night when a desperate young woman found refuge on a lonely rancher's doorstep. On their 10th wedding anniversary, after the children were tucked into bed and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Sam presented Lydia with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, accepting it with curious smile. "Open it," Sam urged, an unusual nervousness in his expression. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a delicate gold locket. When Lydia opened it, she found miniature portraits of their 3 children on one side, and on the other, a tiny piece of paper, yellowed with age. She carefully unfolded it to reveal a few simple words in Sam's handwriting. "You found shelter forever." Lydia looked up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. "You kept this all these years?" Sam nodded, taking her hands in his. "I wrote it the morning after you arrived, while you were still sleeping. I didn't understand then why I felt so certain why those words came to me. I just knew somehow that you were meant to stay." "And you were right," Lydia whispered, leaning forward to kiss him tenderly. "This has been my shelter, my home, my haven. You have been." Outside their window, a spring storm was brewing, lightning illuminating the distant mountains. But within the walls of the home they'd built together, there was only warmth, security, and the enduring love of a family that had begun with an act of kindness on a stormy frontier night. As Lydia tucked the precious note back into the locket and fastened it around her neck, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the grief and loss that had driven her west, the desperate hope that had carried her through that terrible storm, and the man whose quiet strength had become the foundation of her happiness. "I love you, Samuel Everett," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of their shared history and the promise of their future. Sam drew her into his arms, his blue eyes as clear and steady as they had been on the day she first saw them. "And I love you, Lydia Everett, forever." The storm outside grew stronger, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rumbling across the valley. But inside, wrapped in each other's embrace, Lydia and Sam were exactly where they belonged, sheltered, together, home.